It is indeed very good to be home back here at Stanford. It's good for a lot of reasons. Perhaps the most important is that I can now get up in the morning, read the newspaper, and not think that I have to do anything about what's in it. And you have no idea how liberating that is. In that regard, though, I have been, like all citizens, following the trials and tribulations that we are experiencing in the global financial and economic crisis. And when I talked with John Chauvin, he thought that it might be useful to reflect for a few moments not on the economic issues. Certainly, there will be many reflections on that during this conference. But perhaps to start your day over breakfast with a bit of reflection on what this might mean for some of the political and diplomatic challenges that the United States faces as well. And I might just note that I want to take this subject on, even though, of course, as a political scientist, I know that when we are facing circumstances as unprecedented as the ones we now face, the twin challenges of a financial and crisis and a global economic recession, that the discontinuous event is entirely possible. In other words, it is very difficult to predict how something of this magnitude will affect politics. But the one thing that I can say is it will affect politics. This is much more in that regard than an economic and financial crisis. It is indeed a crisis that is going to the heart of issues of governance, of issues of the ability to provide for a population, and in that regard, it is going to the heart of what model of governance and model of political activity can best deliver for people. Perhaps the broadest way to think about this is that it will most certainly have an effect on the willingness of countries around the world to affirm the model of economic development that has really been quite dominant in the international arena since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because central planning, because communism was putatively an alternative way to organize human development, an alternative way to organize economic and political life, when its greatest proponent, the power of the Soviet Union, collapsed, when it was clear that this model had not worked, there was plenty of room for the emergence, and I think some thought the absolute outright victory of what became known as the Washington Consensus, or a model that in effect rejected heavy statism, worked for greater deregulation, for open markets, for free trade, for macroeconomic stability through fiscal discipline, through austere budgets, and emphasized growth. The sort of IMF model, perhaps not emphasizing growth enough in the beliefs of a number of developing countries, but nonetheless, there were few alternatives to this road to economic development. The central planning model was gone, statism was out, and private sector-led development was in. That model did not give way, but was in fact enhanced by the so-called Monterey Consensus, which dates really to the beginning of 2000, the early years of 2000. In fact, 2003, it's named after a conference that was held in Monterey, Mexico, where the issues of macroeconomic stability took a turn to try and emphasize the ability of governments to take growth, to take the benefits of trade, to take the benefits of open markets, and deliver then for their populations, to deliver better health care, to deliver better education, and to try to make social justice then a part of the story of how free markets and open trade could in fact deliver for people. Now that Monterey Consensus had an implicit, if not an explicit, link to democracy and to pluralism in politics. It emphasized the fight against corruption. It emphasized accountability of the governing bodies to those who would be governed. It emphasized that democratic institutions could deliver best for their people. And so this journey from the collapse of communism through the development of an economic model that favored private sector development, through an economic model that would deliver for its people on healthcare and education, from a base of clean governance that was democratic, seemed really rather very much in place, and it, in fact, was codified by the Bush administration, but also in the work of the World Bank and others, in the Bush administration by something called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which made large-scale foreign assistance grants to countries that were making good decisions economically and politically. So if you were, there were actually very hard indicators. So if in fact you were bringing down the number of days to start a business, if you were fighting corruption, if you were making investments in infrastructure, if you were improving democratic governance, then the United States was willing to make large foreign assistance grants. For instance, over $800 million to Tanzania, for instance, over $450 million to Ghana. So very large foreign assistance grants that were tied to governance. Now, the question is, what will the current crisis do to the confidence in this model as a model for development for countries that are at that edge? Now, Paul Romer is going to talk later about some of the issues concerning Africa, so I will not go into great detail there. But let me just note that when we talk about a model, we have to remember this isn't a model. These are real countries. These are real countries and these are real leaders that have taken a bet, that have invested heavily in a particular philosophy and strategy of growth and a particular philosophy and strategy of governance that is now under some strain. And the question is, what will become, in a sense, of democratic capitalism as the dominant strain, not just in Europe, the United States, the developed world, but also in these developing countries that are at the edge. And there are signs that, in fact, the model is very much in question. Not all countries are in the same dire situation, but some are in quite dire situations. One can start, for instance, in Eastern Europe, where countries where communism fell, the early 1990s, had been on a fairly steady path toward both democratic development and capitalism. Some took very big bets, very aggressive policies of low taxation or flat taxation. Estonia, in the Baltic states, was a leader in e-governance and e-capitalism, by the way, making them vulnerable at one point to the hacking of, we believe, Russia against its networks. But these countries took very aggressive policies based on these models. Even countries like Poland and the Czech Republic, wavering back and forth sometimes, but largely in a direction of believing that they could deliver for their people with democratic capitalism. Now, this is now the problems of the global economic system, not just a normal recession, but both the questions about how the financial system has worked, about globalization itself, is leading to a lot of criticism of the governments that have done this. In fact, the government in Latvia has fallen. The government in the Czech Republic is under a lot of pressure. And these are countries where the populations now are questioning whether or not they will be able to receive the benefits from democratic capitalism that they expected. You are having protests in these countries. It's my belief, and it is nothing more, it's not really a prediction, but a belief that these countries, most of them, have democratic institutions that are strong enough to survive these pressures. But we should not underestimate the degree to which they are under pressure.